the former Secretary of State. And so I caught. And a couple things. First, they did not campaign for themselves. There was a campaign, but that was seen as undignified. And so it'd be over 100 years that presidents would campaign for themselves. And even for lower offices, not just lower as in not quite the president, they wouldn't campaign for themselves either. They have newspapers, supporters campaign. It was undignified. Made you go into the gutter, which seems so weird today, obviously, but they're newspapers and cartoonists. So here's Jefferson trying to stop the advancement of the United States. So that's a Federalist cartoon. It's implying that Jefferson was this crazy revolutionary that was going to bring the French Revolution to the United States. And then here we have a Republican, obviously, handbill and save your country from ruin. And it calls the Federalists Tories and the British faction. Remember, Tories, another term for loyalists. And so think about what they're saying with this. They're saying the Federalists are no different than Tories who fought against the Patriots against the creation of the United States. It is saying that Federalists are what? If they fight against the country, they're opposed to the United States. As they said, who fought their country's battles in the year 1776. What are they saying Federalists are? Yeah, they're traitors. If people say that campaigns are really, or politics has gotten so dirty and disagreeable today, and it's never been like this, which I've heard people say, including people on TV, these so-called pundits, they have no idea what they're talking about. When you have one party calling George Washington and them traitors, and they're telling the same thing, and then you have one party calling the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence, in reality, a dangerous revolutionary that's going to destroy the country. We go through waves of this. And so with that, there's another thing. What they thought was the best men will come up for president. Then who picks the president? The Electoral College. They would vote for the best man, and then the guy with the second most vote, remember this is 1796, so it's men. The man with the second most vote would be vice president. But here's the thing. They also knew there might be someone who's unanimous, like Washington, they kind of expected that, would get all the votes. So there'd be no vice president. So every elector has two votes. Has two votes. One for the number one choice, one for the number two choice. So there would be a number two. Do you see a problem if you have parties now? Do you see a problem? They didn't expect this. Now, what they originally did is, okay, all the Republicans vote for Jefferson and then vote for, they try to narrow it down to one candidate for vice president. Same with the Federalists. But it wasn't clear in 1796 who the second guy was. I mean, this is Clinton of New York, but he actually didn't get the most votes for vice president. So they weren't sure who to make their second vote for. So when the Electoral College met that December of 1796, this is how the vote turned out. Can you see the numbers? So they have, and by the way, when they have lines through, that means the vote split. Because there's nothing tying the electors. They can vote for whoever they wanted. That's how the vote went. Yet all these people were voted with the idea they'd be vice president. And do you see the problem? Yeah.
I thought Washington, right after he left to be president, he just left.
Yeah, he went back home and said he wasn't going to run again. But the two electors voted for him.
He didn't run?
No, it wasn't running. They can go right again. They can go right now. The Electoral College technically can go right now to the next election, 2020, vote for whomever they want. Because by state law, they're bound to that candidate. Almost every state has that law. But this is federal. They can vote for anybody they want. Now, they rarely do, but every once in a while, there'll be like a protest vote.
Okay. So every once in a while, they'll vote for Washington.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, technically, yeah, because you can vote for whoever you want. You vote for Washington. I mean, because they're not going to be president. You know, it's ever about constitutional issues about not being over 35 or being dead. Yes. So, but do you see the problem now? Who's president? Who's vice president? Do you see a little bit of a problem? And now they are mortal enemies, especially when they're calling each other traitors and now they're in the same administration. They're like having Trump as president and Hillary Clinton as vice president. And this was a disaster, a constitutional crisis. And there's talk, should we get rid of the Electoral College? Should we make it a popular vote? Should we have it chosen? Madison wanted to go back to the House, which is what he always wanted. Should we just get rid of the presidency? Make it more like a parliament? Have the House pick somebody, the leading member of that House, and become like a prime minister? I mean, this was a real crisis. And Jefferson would spend most of his time back home in Virginia sniping at the president, being the leader of the opposition. And technically, Jefferson's in the administration. Remember, vice presidents, they only have one constitutional function besides waiting for the president to die, breaking ties in the Senate. After that, they have no other constitutional duty, technically. I mean, they could be an advisor. That's kind of what happens now. Or they give him some meaningless thing to go give speeches at. So with that, almost immediately, though, the biggest issue that hit was that commercial war. Remember we talking about the war between Britain and France? And before you write down any of this, do you remember what the French pirates were called?
Oh, it was
Yeah, corsairs. Do you remember the War of Jenkins' Ears? When I talked about the British ships were still stopping Spanish ships, and ships of the Royal Navy, what would they do? They would attack Spanish ships, but they would do what with their flag? They would act like they're not in the Royal Navy anymore, they're pirates. The French Navy was doing that too. And so, don't start writing this down till you know what these things mean. We can all copy stuff. That's easy to copy stuff. Any you can copy. So now write down the XYZ affair. The XYZ affair was this massive diplomatic disaster where the United States, what was that treaty that they got with Britain? They tried to get one with France. The treaty that turned out to be very pro-British.
Oh, Chase Treaty.
Yeah, they tried to get another one. They sent U.S. diplomats, Adams did, and they, to get to the French foreign minister, they had to go through 4 French ministers. So we call these intermediaries. Basically, these are people between the U.S. diplomats and Foreign Minister Talleyrand. And these 4 diplomats demanded now here's the big thing, a loan. If you get a loan, you get to see the Foreign Minister of France, Talleyrand, which is an awesome name. Now, what's a loan? What does a loan mean? But it's a loan. What do we call this one? I'll let you see them, but you give me a little bit of money for it. It's just a bribe. They demanded a bribe, or what they would say then a tribute. The United States was furious at this. And somehow the 4 French intermediaries became X, Y, and Z. I don't know how that happened. I guess WXYZ was too long, but 4 turned into 3. And that's what the XYZ affair is, this attempted bribe. This political cartoon from 1798 shows it. So these are the French diplomats rummaging through the American, that's the national sack of like American wealth, so that's getting the bribe. And you notice they have red, white, and blue. These were the signs of the sans-culottes. And you see the French flag, that's the French flag for the revolution. And so that's the red, white, blue, that's the flag. All these countries, when they won their independence or became constitutional, they would copy the French flag. People copy the French and everything. But like Ireland, Italy, they copy the French flag. But back to this. That's Talleyrand on the hill. And this is the American diplomat, and that's Lady Columbia, and that represents America. And Columbia for Columbus as another term for the Americas, not used as much anymore, but was all the time then. And this symbol of her was also sometimes called Lady Liberty or Lady Columbia. That was used as much as any other symbol for the U.S. all the way into the 20th century. And then during the Spanish-American War, more and more Uncle Sam, which came about in the War of 1812, and then World War I. That really made Uncle Sam. And rarely is Columbia used, even though sometimes you'll see that's Liberty is. Yeah, that poster, I want you copying the British poster from World War I. That would probably make Uncle Sam like now, if we think of Uncle Sam, we think of the U.S. But remember the feathers? Because American Indians represented what? It's that weird, yeah, you want to take your land, but you still represent liberty. And so that's where that comes from. And you notice they're plucking her feathers and taking them. And so they're depriving us of our liberty. Federalists went nuts. They already feared the French Revolution and they're more pro-British in this, and now they're saying they demand a tribute. They're not treating us like an equal country. They're treating us like a country they can kick around. I mean, say what you want about the Jay's Treaty. They agreed to a treaty. We both signed on the document like countries that recognize each other, not the French. We can't allow this to go on. And so the Federalists began pushing Adams to do something about this. So let's use our Navy to stop the Corsairs in the French Navy. And this would push them to the Quasi-War. And the Quasi-War, quasi means like partial, kind of an archaic term for partial. And it's an undeclared war. This is another cartoon of the XYZ affair. And here's the American diplomats trying to get past the many-headed monster of Talleyrand with the turbans, which are supposed to become these mystical, they would say Orientalism at that time, to go see the French ministers. And we're not going to go into all the details of it, but look at now, remember Columbia? And they drew her as this beautiful woman with the feathers. Now look at their symbol of French liberty and what really happened with the French Revolution. Slightly different, right? And what is she doing? What's that? What's this?
Oh,
Do you notice the guy there? Do you see a head? So
No.
that's French liberty. That's a pretty gruesome one. I like that one.
that's disgusting.
No head. He doesn't know. So with that, and yes, somebody would point out, freakishly skinny leg. Okay, so with that, but the thing is this. We're going to use our Navy. There's one catch. What's the catch? Well, we don't have a Navy. So the Federalists in Congress voted for a new department of the U.S. executive branch called the Department of the Navy. And they raised the excise taxes to pay for the Navy. Now, the excise taxes, much like the Assumption Bill, who's paying the taxes? What kind of people? Remember the Assumption Bill? Who was that tax against? Was it merchants? Yeah, the small farmers. So we have another reason for Republicans to get mad. Not only are we now going to an undeclared war with France, but you're taxing the small farmers who the Republicans feel they represent. And those ships on there, the U.S. did not make them. Ships of the line, battleships. They made these really fast, quite efficient frigates based on a French design. So they had about 20-some gun cannon on each side, black powder cannon, of course. These are the cannon right here. That's the Constellation. And if you ever get to Baltimore, they have remade it. So they have this kind of hulk, and they redid and replaced so much of the wood. And so you can go tour it. It's really cool. That is the Constitution. And that's fighting that's fighting one of the very few battles during the war. But the Constitution, so many cannonballs in the War of 1812 bounced off its oaken hulls. They call it whole Ironsides. And the Constitution is still in the United States Navy today. A ship that's on active duty is called commissioned, and it is commissioned. It has a U.S. Navy crew. It is in Boston Harbor. If you go to Boston, you can tour it, and your tour guide is a chief petty officer of the United States Navy. That's equivalent of, let's say, like a master sergeant in the other armed forces. And it's still in the U.S. Navy. So a Navy crew takes it out. It's still commissioned, ready to fight.
Why did the cannonballs bounce off the wood?
Because cannonballs are round and gunpowder doesn't move very fast.
Okay.
Yeah. So if it's not strong enough to go through the wood, it just bounces off.
Was that the surprising thing?
Oh, yeah, they knew.
Okay.
Now, sometimes it would hit and like splinters and like pieces would go flying in all over. That's why before naval battles at this time, they would always dump sawdust on the deck. Why? So the crew doesn't slip on the blood. Because think about all the splinters that just tear people up and blood be everywhere. It's times. But so yes, it's in the U.S. Navy today, and so when the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, the Constitution actually shelled the beaches of Iraq over the invasion. Because it's still in the Navy today. So with that, let's move on to. I told the other classes, and they're like, oh, that makes sense. No, we did not use a sailing vessel from 1798. Not only because it has black powder weapons, but also there's something else really big that's wrong with what I said. Anyone know?
So back then,
Iraq doesn't have a shore. It's like shelling the shores of Wyoming. So with that, Republicans were furious, huh? Yeah, that's all. Yeah, that's what the aliens want us to think. So with that, there was no declaration of war. So Republicans were furious about that, furious about taxing small farmers, and more Federalists and Tories became equivalent, and Tories equal traitor. And so Republicans bitterly criticized it. An election in 1798 for members of the House called the midterm elections coming up. The presidency's in 1800, and the Republicans are hammering on this undeclared war. Now, I got to be very clear. There's virtually no fighting. A couple small naval battles, that's it. Because it's not really a war as we think about it. But still, the implications of it are that if the United States goes to war with France, indirectly, who is the United States now allied with? Britain. And that's what they said. The Republicans said, these Tories are just using this as a backdoor way to get us to fight with the British and eventually unify. The monarchy's coming back. If you get people riled up, they'll believe it. Remember when I give you that term demagoguery? Demagogue? And so, Federalists, terrified of this criticism, but there's something else. The Federalists are starting to think they might be in the minority. And they might be elected out of office. And they're thinking, this criticism is going to get us, and we might be elected out of office. There are new immigrants coming in. And most of those immigrants, when they become citizens, they're going to be Republicans. And that's going to directly lead to 3 laws. Oh, we're jumping right here. 3 laws that we lump together as the Alien and Sedition Acts. And the Alien and Sedition Act, alien means immigrants who come to the United States but are not yet citizens. And sedition, that's traitorous speech against the government. By the way, define traitorous. Wouldn't you like to have the power to define what traitorous is? Wouldn't that be just about anything? But the 3 parts. First off, these aliens were coming in, and in 5 years they could be a citizen. This would make it 14. So they had to be in the United States as a resident alien. That term is now gone for lots of reasons, but then they called it resident aliens because for 5 years they're a citizen, not 14. Next, dangerous aliens. That's how they spelled it in the law, so I do think that's great. So dangerous aliens, men like Citizen Genet, who tried to breed rebellion within the borders of the U.S., to be deported. So the executive can figure out who's dangerous, and they define who's dangerous, and deport them. And thirdly, no sedition. No traitorous talk against the government. Because if the government is criticized, who does that help? Who? Not, I mean, who? No. What country are we fighting? It'll help France. It'll help France. Have I heard that? Someone said I didn't quite hear it, but yeah, that'll help France. That would be the justification. Not really. That's what they said. So we're going to make sure people who really are committed to become Americans, no dangerous ones, and we're fighting the French on the open seas, even though it's rarely happening. But let's get to the real part. Who does this target? This is a 100% anti-Republican bill. The Federalists are using their power to try to weaken the Republicans because they know the Republicans are going to get the majority. So they're trying everything they can to hold on to power. Hold on to power. And the reason why is simple. Most of these new immigrants are going to become Republicans. They believe that. Let's push it down the road. Because there is one thing. 1/3 of all immigrants leave, go back home. It's like that to this day. They come here and they go back home. It isn't what they thought, for whatever reason, they never plan on staying, so they go back. So let's see if we can't push it down, make it more difficult, so they leave, we hold our majority. Second, dangerous aliens. This really wasn't a problem. But by saying this is a problem, it exaggerates the danger of immigrants. They're trying to make the country anti-immigrant. Anti-immigrant, if most immigrants become Republican, that will undermine the Republican Party. Now, this is called nativism.
Why don't they become Democrats?
Huh?
Why would they become Republican?
Well, they assume they'd be small farmers. They wouldn't be merchant class.
Oh,
So, everyone write down nativism. This is what we call nativism, which is anti-immigrant feeling. And there's going to be waves of nativism in the United States. You'll see it here, you'll see it in the 1840s, you'll see it in the 1890s, you'll see it in the 1920s, you see it in the 1970s, you see it at about 12 after 1 in the United States of America. I mean, there's a very strong nativist wave in the United States today, trying to make it more difficult for people to become citizens and claiming that immigrants are dangerous. They're coming in, and now it's crime. Then it was radical revolutionaries, and it's been very effective on a lot of people, and so that's why they do it. Now that one, this today is the week of a different party. Actually, the same party. The Republicans at this time would become the Democrats. So it's meant to weaken the Democrats today, and it's been pretty darn effective. And so then sedition. Now let me ask you something. I said, well, would it be, God, if you want to be a tyrant, wouldn't you like a law like that? So anything anybody says, you could simply brand it as sedition. You're helping the enemy by speaking. If you say something like, gosh, I think John Adams shouldn't be reelected. Well, who else wants that? The French. You're a traitor. Is that sedition? Most rational people, most people do not want to go to jail. Did you know that? Am I saying anything radical there? You want to go? It's kind of cool, isn't it? Meet people. But here's the thing. If you might go to jail for something you say, and you're not exactly sure what is sedition, what are you going to say? Huh? Nothing. And this is what you got to get. Laws like this, it's not the arresting people. It's shutting up normal political discourse. You end political conversation with this. Everyone got that? You end political conversation with laws like this. Anti-sedition laws are designed not to stop the enemy. They're designed to stop your opponents politically. If you wanted to create a tyranny, what's the first thing you would do? Before you even do that, you go to war. You find an enemy, and then you ban the freedom of speech, saying you're helping the enemy. First thing, you go to war. Secondly, you pass a law like this. Every authoritarian state does that. Every single one. From Hitler to Idi Amin in Uganda to Saddam Hussein. And how many times did the United States pass a law like this? In almost every one. So we go down the road to tyranny too. Yeah.
When they went into the quasi-war, did they want this to happen, or were they, because of the quasi-war, they're like, oops, so they covered it up with this?
Exactly.
Okay.
Oh, they would have loved to shut up the Republicans, but this wasn't a plan.
Okay.
But so many countries do it now, it's not a plan. I mean, if you want to create a totalitarian state, the first thing you do is you create a war and get people scared, and then they'll pass laws like this. And it could happen everywhere, including Wyoming. And we all think Wyoming is a place that nothing bad could ever happen. Who's with me on that? It's square. It's like a rectangle, right? What bad could happen there? So with this, Republicans are furious. Not a lot would be arrested. But here's the thing. Adams didn't like this law, but he signed it anyways because Adams thought it was constitutional. Is it constitutional? What does that First Amendment say? Congress cannot infringe on the freedom of speech. Does this infringe on the, is this saying Republicans can't talk? No, it says no sedition. Republicans or Federalists or people who aren't in any party are going to have to follow the same law. So they're not saying you can't speak. You can say anything you want, but you can't say traitorous talk. That's how they argued it did not violate the First Amendment. And every other law banning the freedom of speech would follow that same argument. So this would be the argument against people who were opposed to the draft in World War I, and thousands would be arrested. Some deported to other countries. This would be the same argument to put Japanese American citizens of the United States in concentration camps in World War II. The same exact argument. Remember what I told you. We don't have a blanket right to freedom of speech, and it's open to interpretation. Because what do the Republicans say? This is, without a doubt, flagrantly an attack on the Republicans and violating our freedom of speech. Which one do you think it is? I believe 100% with Republicans on this one. Of course there's a sign for that. But how do you stop the constitutionality of a law? Or how do you stop a law because it's unconstitutional? Madison thought the president would, but Adams didn't think it was unconstitutional. So he signed it. Today.
I thought that was the judicial branch.
Oh, the judicial branch. It doesn't say that in the Constitution. They didn't give themselves that power to 1803.
Oh, okay.
Do you see a problem? And even then, it's still only issued, rarely it has to be a court case. So, Jefferson and Madison came up with this idea. It's called the Kentucky and Virginia Resolutions. And these were done in the state assemblies of each state. And what it said was this. And Jefferson wrote it, but the Kentucky Assembly put it out. Same with Virginia. States could nullify, which means do not follow unconstitutional laws. So states could do that. And the idea was, okay, Kentucky thinks the Sedition Act is unconstitutional. We won't enforce it in our borders. And the thought was, many other states could do this. But Jefferson and Madison, who both were parts of the federal government, Madison's in the House, Jefferson's the vice president. And they're telling states to not obey the law. And here's the thing. What if Kentucky says, we're not going to obey the law? And the national government says, yes, you are. And we will make you. Then what can the states do? What is their last straw? Okay, if you're going to say that we have to obey unconstitutional laws, you're violating that agreement we made in Philadelphia. And what's someone said? I have it written up here. Secede. And secede means leave the union. And if a state leaves the union and the federal government lets them, the country's gone. It will dissolve. So what does this mean? Secession means what? What does that mean? What does that mean? If a state leaves and the federal government leaves them, the country is gone. If the federal government says, no, you're not going to leave, what happens? Civil war. Jefferson and Madison were playing with fire. In 1833, southern states would use this to protect slavery. That's states' rights meant protecting slavery. It was code. And they tried to nullify the tariff. We'll get to this later. That's when Andrew Jackson saved the Union in 1833. And in 1860 and 61, that's when southern states used as their excuse to leave the Union and start the Civil War. Going back to this, they were playing with fire because they're talking Civil War. Nullification equals Civil War. Fortunately for all of us, if you want the United States to survive, the Convention of 1800 stopped the war. There's peace, but you can imagine how bitter both parties are. Federalists are thinking the Republicans now, that proves to them they're a bunch of traitors and revolutionaries. And to Republicans, the Federalists are a bunch of despots. And so because of this, and this is a comical picture of U.S. militia in 1800. We didn't have much of an army, is the point. Oh, in 1800, if they would have nullified the law, there'd be no U.S. It just would have crumbled. Same with 1833. 1861, little damage. So that, we have the election of 1800. And here, it's a rematch. Jefferson, and this creepy picture of Jefferson right here. And basically this is Adams go home, or Adams no more. And here's Adams, and the creepy picture of Adam on all the state shields. Now, I talked about the hand, didn't I, about the portrait with the hand? Well, they would also draw pictures. Remember, portraits are designed to make them look better. They don't commission a portrait and say, hi, make me look ugly. So they want to soften their features and make them better, especially for the style of the time. So I didn't talk about this, did I? So people over 30, when they start getting middle age, when they would draw their portrait, they made them all look like middle-aged to senior citizen aged women. Don't they both? Especially Adams? Doesn't he look like? And if they're younger than, let's say, middle age, they make them all look like junior high age girls. I'll show you pictures of those, and they're really funny, of young men. But one more thing. This is a good time to show you that portrait painters were trying to make them look better. That means they're softening their features. So think about how they must have really looked. And a good example of this is, let me show you King Charles and King Philip. Charles and his great-great-grandson Philip of Spain from the 16th and 17th century. Are you ready? And I just want you to realize that they are trying to make them look better.
Oh my God. Oh. I'm sorry, that's just.
Now, I know what you're thinking. We can all see the family resemblance, the bridge of the nose, but, and one more thing. This is why inbreeding is bad. Do not marry your first cousin. That's what all these monarchies did. They all married cousins. Have you ever looked at the royal family of England? There's a reason they all look like horses. So with that,
Oh.
don't marry your cousin. Yeah. Huh? So, I filmed that. But I think that's good advice. I would argue that will help you. So, the election of 1800, this time they thought they had it resolved. All of Adams' electors voted for Adams, and all but one voted for Timothy Pinckney. So, there was no tie. But Jefferson's vice president, a man nobody really trusted because they weren't sure what side he was on, Aaron Burr, but he's from New York, so they wanted the New York electoral votes.
He was Republican.
The electors forgot which one was supposed to vote for somebody else, it's Clinton. And so all the electors voted for Jefferson, and all voted for Burr. Tie.
Oh yeah, and then they had to I was reading this, and they had to go to the House of
Yeah,
Representatives.
because no one has a majority.
But Jefferson ended up getting.
Well, the reason why is, at first went to the House, and Burr should have said, I don't want to be president, right? The people, the electors wanted Jefferson, but Burr's like, being president sounds kind of good. And what did the Federalists think? What a great way to get the Republicans if we put Burr in there and not Jefferson. So Federalists pushed for it in the House, but it was one state, one vote in the House, regardless of how many members of Congress you have. At the last minute, a couple prominent Federalists said, we can't do this. If we put Burr in there, the whole country might fall apart. Because the voters clearly wanted Jefferson. And so Jefferson would win. One prominent New York Federalist who was in exile because nobody really liked him was a man by the name of Alexander Hamilton. So get him down. Hamilton threw his support to Jefferson. He hated Jefferson, but he despised Burr. Is that what you're going to say, Lauren?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Burr, and we'll get to this because Burr's now going to be very angry at Hamilton. Then a couple more things will happen, and the next thing you know, it will involve pistols on a little island. I'll tell you the whole story of the duel, but there's one more thing, the last thing for today. Remember the Three-Fifths Compromise?
Yes.
Northerners called it slave power. If they only counted white citizens for representation, Adams would have won 65-16. Northerners were furious, and thus you get the slave power. And they called Jefferson, get this down, the Negro president. The Negro president. Not because slaves had more power, but because the slave herders, as they called them, had more power. And Jefferson liked to act like the great philosopher, remember the Declaration of Independence and other things? This mocks this by calling him like a rooster, and the hens are the slaves. So another word for rooster is cocks, with a philosophic cock. Like he is this, and then here are the hens. And they drew Africans with turbans. I don't know why either, They didn't know, I guess, in 1800, which makes no sense, considering where slaves were from. But that's where you get this. By the way, they were already whispering about what slave owners do and how awful it was in the North. But remember the fornication law? That's coming out.
No, that's stupid. I still.
So, everybody have a good weekend. Please go through the review list. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer it. I got to play Vietnam War music.
Wait, so we do get to listen to the Vietnam War music today?
Only just one song.
Okay.